I set out primarily to talk to parents, but also anybody else who had some sense that what they were hearing was true, to take them by the hand and show them, look at this. This is, this isn't true. Look at what it's leading to. And and just explain the results of what's happening to our society when we accept all these euphemisms and we don't look underneath and find out what they're really saying to us. They want our children. They want to hurt our children. And it's not because they're sadistic, it's because they believe that they need these children to prove that their ideology is real.
Anita Bartholomew is a journalist. She set out to understand what was happening to the children of her peer group and discovered a quote, authoritarian, tyrannical, cult like ideology harming children. By her own account, Ms. Bartholomew started out to the left of Bernie Sanders. In her new book, she indicts the progressive left for making sacrificial lambs of children. Anita, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Thank you very much for having me on.
Anita, for listeners who don't know you, could you please take a minute to describe yourself and your illustrious career before you started this project?
Well, I'm a magazine journalist, which means that, I generally take several months to research a story, whereas a newspaper journalist might take 3 hours because they're on deadline. I have been a contributor and contributing editor for Reader's Digest. I started writing for them. Oh God, I'll date myself, but let's just, yes, mid 90s. So I've got a very long career writing for Reader's Digest and also other magazines, obviously. I've focused on issues like health, politics, social issues, but I've always really been most interested in the human beings, or in some cases, I've written some animal stories too about the animals. I really want to know who things are happening to. This is, to me, the most interesting part about writing. It's not about, this happened, this study came out, that it's like, how are people affected? And so when I discovered this issue, it was like, oh my God, uh, this is horrible. This is what is happening to families and to children. Oh, and I should also mention that a couple of my stories have been made into TV movies. Uh, Granted, they were bad TV movies, but they were still TV movies. So that's something. And I am I'm a behind the scenes kind of writer, so I've never been very much out there. I'm always the interviewer, not the interviewee, and so it's a little strange being on the other side of this.
Every story of someone going through peak trans, as we call it, is different. There's a wonderful meme that I picked up a few years ago. It's this roller coaster, and you have the roller coaster that's coming down off the top of the roller coaster has zombies in it, and the roller coaster that's going up has, like regular people in it. And the regular people, it says people learning about autogynephilia, and the zombie people coming down, it says people who just learned about autogynephilia. This is a sort of perfect encapsulation of what it's like to discover these distressing aspects of what is going on. But you started out with the kids, all right? So talk about this peak trans journey. What was the first moment when you realize something is very, very wrong?
Well, I actually knew and, not well, but met quite a number of people who identified as trans in the Portland area, all men. And I didn't really think much about it. I just thought, well, they're gay guys, and now they want to, dress as women because this is being accepted. But then I learned that there were children who were being transitioned, and they were in the families of people I knew. And the first the first person that I heard this from, she didn't even tell me that her daughter was uh, claiming to be a boy. She sent me an email about what boy name was doing this week, and I thought, well, who is this person? And then I realized, oh, that's Lucy. And so we didn't speak that often or email that often, so I just let it go, and it was unsettling. Then another friend of mine told me that her granddaughter, who went to a very progressive college and had never shown any signs of any gender confusion, within a few months decided that she wanted to be a boy. And a few months after that, she was going to have quote unquote top surgery. And I said, oh my God, don't let her do that. She's having a double mastectomy. She's 18 years old. But my friend kind of shrugged and said, well, there's nothing I can do about it. She's my granddaughter, not, and the parents are very much into this. And so that was really quite horrifying. But that was two kids, but then it happened again and again and again. And I just couldn't believe that friends of mine were accepting, or at least feeling that they couldn't do anything about it, that they were powerless in the face of this new thing that children wanted to do themselves. And so I started investigating, obviously. And I just had to write about it. I felt like, the movie Soylent Green, where Charlton Heston comes out and he yells, Soylent Green is people. That's what I felt that I had to do. I had to run down the street and say, my God, look at what's happening. Um, and I discovered that nobody wanted to hear it. Um, at least nobody who hadn't already learned. So I went to Reader's Digest immediately, obviously, and I tried to sell them an article on this. And I went to the US edition, and they said, no, we don't think so. And I thought, well, this is one of the greatest medical scandals I've ever heard of. How can they not be interested? But okay, they're a little more conservative than the international edition. And I wrote for both editions. So I went to my international edition editor and I said, well, US edition has turned this down, but you've really got to learn about this. This is something horrible is happening. And she said, no, I don't think we'll touch that either. And I was just shocked. But of course, this was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I've since learned that this is the norm. Nobody wants to touch this.
Why do you think that is?
Well, as I came to learn, the all our institutions are ideologically captured. So it's not just the medical and the educational system or the mental health system. It's everyone. It is the nonprofits. But it's especially media. If you look at virtually anything that's written about transgender children, of course, obviously, there is no such thing as a transgender child. It's always well, we've got to get them this care. They don't say what that care is. It's just this euphemistic gender affirming care because it's life saving. And you'll see this over and over and over and over again. And whenever there's a, a law that someone attempts to pass to limit these horribly mutilating chemical and surgical procedures, it's that they are trying to deny, quote unquote, trans children life saving care. I don't know why the non captured who don't talk this way, media, won't touch it, but they won't. It's just kind of radioactive. But I think I do know why a number of the media that we know claim, make these ridiculous claims, do so. And I one day took the time to look at all the LinkedIn bios that I could find of people who were authoring these scare articles about how children who needed life-saving care were in danger of having it denied. And they, almost every one of them gave their pronouns in their LinkedIn bios, had come recently from graduating school and getting a job in major media. And to me, it was very odd that someone who is obviously not going to be objective at all was given the LGBTQ beat. But this was what was happening. We had propaganda wall to wall. And so you really couldn't get through to anybody that they were taking little children, sometimes as young as 8 and 9 years old, and really depriving them of any future, giving them puberty blockers that would destroy their endocrine systems, very likely ruin any chance of their ever having uh, a sexual life when they were older, because you know, if you go from puberty blockers on to hormones, cross-sex hormones, you're going to be sterile. And as even Dr. Marcy Bowers, the famous guy who operated on Jazz Jennings, surgeon, said, if you do this, if you go straight from puberty blockers when you're very young onto cross-sex hormones, you're sterile and you'll never have an orgasm. Horrible things, but nobody was reporting this. And then I realized, well, okay, some conservative media were reporting it. And in our country, we have this great divide where we have not just a two-party system, we have a two-reality system where if you are sort of on the right, you're going to get this information from Fox and so on. But if you're on the left, you get none of it. You get this nonsense about life-saving care and trans kids. And so I felt, okay, if I can get the word out, nobody's ever going to call me right wing. I just had finished writing a book about the January 6th siege of the Capitol. And it was not, let's say, flattering to Trump and friends. And I have, you know, a good, strong background as a liberal, whatever that means these days, right? So maybe I can get through. And so I started researching in earnest and working on the book.
So there was a process of unlearning what you have learned, uh, quote unquote, finding out what your filters have been filtering. There are various stories about this that I enjoy. I've heard several people talk about how the algorithm changes, that once you start inquiring into one topic, that it becomes the foot in the door to other topics that, oh wow, if I was wrong about this thing, what else was I wrong about? And you figure out that maybe this is not the only example of a policy area, let's say, where you have had young, overeducated somethings who've been setting policy, right? In that process of unlearning what you've been taught and finding out what your filters have been filtering, in that experience, what did you find, not just within gender, but outside of gender? Like, what changed about you as a result of this journey, for lack of a better word?
Ah, yeah. How many hours do you have, Matt? It really was an eye-opener to discover how deeply I had been indoctrinated into believing my trusted sources. So, and to just dismissing things that people who I thought, well, they couldn't possibly know what they're talking about, realizing that they had some good points that I had refused to hear. And I don't want to go too far afield with this, but one of the issues that, if, as long as you're asking about non-gender issues, is rampant immigration. And for the longest time, I thought, well, as a good liberal, we've done some damage to some other countries, and so can we really complain if we've made their countries worse for them if they want to come here? And then I heard about the little town in Ohio, Springfield, Ohio, where I think they had a base population of about 50,000. And somehow on the, what do they call it? The temporary protected status, with Haitians coming in, they had 15,000 or so Haitians in that little town all of a sudden. And how is that going to change the culture? And don't people have a right to hold on to their culture as is? And of course, um, as if I had heard this story a couple of years before, it would have been, oh, well, they're being anti-immigrant. And now I felt some compassion for them. And, you know, they're, everything gets more expensive when you have this sudden influx. Rents go up because the government is subsidizing these people, and so the people who actually live there were losing their apartments. So yeah, that's one instance of being an eye opener, that I had not considered all the ways that people can see the world differently from me, that might be valid ways to see it. And mea culpa.
Yes, and that's a very familiar one right there. And in part because, if you asked me, say, 7 years ago, uh, about immigration, I would have said this is actually not something that people, like a whole lot of people, care very deeply about. It is a minority that feels very deeply about this. I would have said that 7 years ago. But something changed during the Biden administration, right? We had suddenly an influx of immigrants over the border. And yeah, as you're saying, prices go up on rents and things like that. And people start to, have a reaction to the presence of Trenda Aragua in their neighborhoods. And, oh, well, you're just bigots. Oh,
Mhm.
that sounds familiar, right? I had that happen to me. Suddenly I was a bigot because I disagreed on this policy question all of a sudden. I changed my mind on this one thing and suddenly I became literally Hitler. They're putting toothbrush mustaches on us and saying, that we're literally Hitler. So, I completely understand where you're coming from. And I wanted to ask about sort of non-gender stuff because I found that it's either gender, usually sports, or it's COVID. It's one of those two things. And one is followed by the other. Like someone who says, wait a minute, this COVID stuff is messed up. Oh, wow, that gender stuff is messed up. Or that it goes the other way. This gender stuff is messed up. Oh, wow, that COVID stuff is really messed up. It's in there somewhere, and immigration is in there somewhere. And it's like this cascade of issues where you begin to look beyond that bubble you had created for yourself and take in new voices. And it leaves you disappointed in many of the people that you had respected up to that point. Did you lose respect for anybody along the way?
Well, I don't know that. I can say that I lost respect for people who I had respected. I understood that a lot of people had very uh, restricted views, and I think I wanted to shake some people. But I needed to be shaken myself, so I really can't complain about others, right?
So, talk about this book. How long did it take to write this book? What was that process like? And let me just say, it is a well-written book because it does not sort of dwell on anything long enough to get you bored about any point. I mean, it is thorough, but it is very, very fast. I found it a very quick read. But talk about that. Talk about that process of writing this book.
Yes. Well, thank you, Matt. I it was a very long process because I was gathering information for probably, I would say, 9 months to a year before I was writing much. I really needed to dig down and find out first what the hell is happening. And the more I dug, the more I discovered, under the surface. It's like the onion that never loses. No matter how many layers you peel, there are more. And I began interviewing people and, just uh, maintaining notes and changing my mind about what was shocking. Because what shocked me at the beginning, by the time I was uh, about halfway through, didn't seem very shocking anymore. It seemed, well, oh ho, oh hum, because this other thing is even more shocking. So I approached it in large part by trying to imagine what other people would need to know about this as I was learning, and how I could persuade people like me, or like me a few years ago, that they need to pay attention, they need to be concerned, and they need to help us put an end to this madness. I would start, some of the chapters in the middle of the book were written before the beginning of the book. And then I tried to put it in an order so I could take readers by the hand and say, okay, see, you start here and you understand this piece. Now let's go a little further and understand this other piece. Um, and I especially wanted to talk to parents because there are so many parents who I interviewed for this book who were just blindsided by what happened to their families. And most of them were like you and me. They were, good liberals. They thought, well, this is, I know all the teachers in this school. They're lovely people. They would, always have my children's best interest at heart. And what they didn't realize is that these teachers had come in from their schools already indoctrinated into queer theory and transgenderism beliefs. And so lovely though they may be, it's like saying, yes, that person I met from the Taliban is a lovely person, and how could they ever do anything, harmful? But this is a belief system. This is a religion. It's like being in a cult and not knowing. So all these parents who had all this trust in their schools, suddenly the child comes home and says he or she is a different sex. Parent doesn't know where this came from. There was one woman who, said that, my son came home and he told us he was thinking that he might be a girl. And we had listened to NPR. We knew that it was very important that you affirm. And so we affirmed. And she was going through breast cancer treatment at the time. So she didn't stop to think, does any of this make sense? This boy is a very masculine boy. She believed. And then finally, when she had the time to stop and think, it was after she had already agreed to let her child have puberty blockers. And she looked at the research and she said, "My God, what are we doing?" There are so many stories about this. Another parent who you know, Beth Bourne, was blindsided, didn't realize that this was being taught to her child when the child came home with a new name, didn't know that she had gotten this from school. Yet another parent, the children come home in a group with her daughter, and they're all claiming to be polyamorous, or they are pansexual. And she laughs, what is this nonsense? You're 11 years old. You're not any kind of sexual. Not realizing that the schools are indoctrinating their children into these beliefs. So yeah, I set out primarily to talk to parents, but also anybody else who had some sense that what they were hearing was true, to take them by the hand and show them, look at this. This is, this isn't true. Look at what it's leading to. And just explain the results of what's happening to our society when we accept all these euphemisms and we don't look underneath and find out what they're really saying to us. They want our children. They want to hurt our children. And it's not because they're sadistic, it's because they believe that they need these children to prove that their ideology is real.
Yes, the parents who experience this, of course, live in liberal communities, right? Or they have up until recently. They are most often Democrats. That's how we get Democrats with an informed approach to gender. We don't have Republicans with an informed approach to gender. It's Democrats with an informed approach to gender, is because mostly the parents are liberal, or they start out that way. I have, had enough stories told to me now about families in this situation that I have to question whether Democrats have really thought about the math involved. You get a family, let's say, of two adults and three kids. The youngest child it runs away from home because they have a transgender identity at the age of, 14. The red carpet of state services is rolled out for the child. There's complete cooperation from every sector of society, police, school, etc., to make sure that the child does not ever have to go home. The child is now apparently 18, and as far as I know, has never registered to vote. But the four other people in the household, the two who were adults and the two who have become adults, they're all Republican voters now.
Mhm.
So a household has been turned from five Democrats, basically, into one non-voter and four Republicans. And I don't think Democrats really understand that math. You found the schools were actually worse than you had imagined, that the sex education does not really teach them about sex anymore. It's about the liturgy of gender. To talk about what you discovered and the process of just sort of finding out what's really going on in schools.
Well, it is amazing to me that, and this is happening in red states too, as you probably know, but in the most liberal and progressive, they are getting them sometimes as young as 5 years old, whether it's part of the primary curriculum or it's a rainbow club or a Skittles club that's an extracurricular activity that they're all encouraged to join, to be supportive of their LGBTQ uh, classmates, but really they only mean TQ, right? So I uh, found some of these materials that were directed towards, let's say, let's start with the first and second graders, where uh, it's actually part of what is called the comprehensive sexuality curriculum, and this has been adopted by law in a couple of states and is adopted elsewhere informally, where a child in the first grade must learn about things like gender and how you can be a different gender from your actual sex, and how the doctor only guessed whether you were a boy or a girl when you were born, but you might be a boy or a girl regardless of your body parts, or you might be both, or you might be neither. So you're confusing children at the very earliest ages. Now, these are children who are learning to read. They're learning cat, dog, school, bus, mommy, daddy. But you know what they're also learning, because this is part of the future of sex education curriculum? They're supposed to learn about body parts, not stomach and lungs and skeleton and knees and nose, but uh, penis, scrotum, vulva, clitoris. Uh, there's one diagram that I got through a public records request from Portland Public Schools, where you have two nude children, right? Illustrations standing next to one another, and one is called person with a penis and person with a vulva, because they don't want to insult children who don't identify as either a boy or a girl. So, person with a penis, person with a vulva. Then the next illustration is pretty much the view that you would get if you put a young girl in the gynecologist's stirrups, where everything is shown, vulva, labia, clitoris, anus, what have you. And these are all labeled, but then that's not even enough for this curriculum. Now we're talking second grade. Second grade, the teacher is instructed to have her class take sticky notes with the names of each of these body parts and put them on the correct body part. What on earth are we doing telling second graders that they have to put sticky notes on these body parts? So you're confusing children not just about what sex they are, but you're also sexualizing them. And this to me was just mind blowing. Especially since this is, by the way, I believe it was Advocates for Youth. This is one of the biggest sex education um, publishers in this country, and they also, I believe, provide sex education materials to Canada. This is not sex education as we knew it, where you find out you know, what the uterus is for, and how reproduction happens, and you probably find that out at a much later age, around fifth or sixth grade. This is indoctrination. This is breaking down the boundaries of a child and imposing your desires for queering these children onto the child. And in the literature I've seen, this is not hidden. Queering children before they're old enough to really understand what sex is. There's a pretty often cited paper called something like Sex Education and Queer Futurity, where they spell out that they want to make sure that children have the opportunity to be quote unquote queer, and they want to get this information to them before they are exposed to what they call cis normative viewpoints. Cis meaning not not confused about what sex you are.
Yes, so you were reacting to this material, and you also come across stories like that of Barbara Farmer,
Ah,
who was the school employee who tried to lure an immigrant child away from her family. This is more common, I think, than we realize. So, talk about what you found teachers doing that was alarming you, in addition to the course materials, of course.
yeah, well, the course materials are throughout the schools, but there are many teachers who, of course, are indoctrinated into believing that this is the best thing they could possibly do, queering children, um, will promote other materials and activities for the children to constantly uh, put the idea of being another sex in front of them. So this one woman who I call Barbara Farmer, it's a pseudonym, uh, is in the Olympia School District, and she was known for taking young, vulnerable girls under her wing. She's a fifth grade teacher, she was at the time. Um, and so she would talk to these kids during school, but also after school. She would send them texts, she would send them emails, and she would really love bomb these children. And then she would tell them that uh, they really need to hear about how some children are not the sex they appear to be. She insisted that they watch Drag Queen Story Hour when, even when parents had tried to opt them out. She would read them stories about being quote unquote transgender. The whole school was like this, though, of course. The principal once got on stage in a gender unicorn costume, you know, one of those inflatable things. And some children who tried to not be participants in this and who went to the ladies' room to avoid it were gathered by Mrs. Farmer and said, "No, you have to watch this." So she took this one girl, Maya, under her wing. Maya is Indian, from India, and she was in a very close-knit Indian community where they perform cultural activities in their um, community. And one activity was she had to wear a dress from India and learn to dance in it. Well, she told her teacher that the dress was itchy. And the teacher said, "Well, you know, maybe your problem isn't that the dress is itchy. Maybe it's that you don't like dresses at all. Maybe you don't like dresses at all because you're not a girl at all." And before long, she had the little girl convinced she wasn't a girl. She was calling herself Felix. But Farmer said to all the children in the classroom, "Now, you all have to call her Felix, and you all have to use he, they pronouns, but you absolutely cannot tell your parents about it because they will tell Maya's parents." So all the children now are freaked out because they have this secret that they have to hide from their parents too. Fast forward, Maya eventually decides that she doesn't really want to be a boy, but Mrs. Farmer, after Maya has been taken out of school for a few days because her mom finds out what's going on in school, starts texting and emailing the little girl and saying, "Well, where are you? How are you? Are you, um, is there anybody who you can stay with who is safe?" Meaning someone who would accept your male identity. And Maya never responded to any of these texts or emails claiming that she actually still believed this. But the teacher just didn't stop. She just kept trying to, she was literally stalking this child. And finally she said, well, you know, you can always come stay with me if you need someone safe, someplace safe. Now, this is a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old. And Maya told her mother, well, you know, I don't want to be a boy anymore, but if I tell my teacher, she's not going to like me. Eventually, the mom and dad got so freaked out by this that they sent their two children, Maya and her younger brother, to live in India with the grandparents. They were worried that the state could take away their child. And the crazy thing is that that could actually happen. It's, as you know, happened around the country where the state will take the child if the child claims to be a different sex. In Washington state, where this happened, the following year, they codified this, where if a child says, I am transgender and I'm going to run away from home and I want so-called gender affirming care, the state will not tell the parents where that child is. They will let her stay with a glitter family who will then be allowed to put her through these horrible procedures.
Parents and kids have harrowing experiences with this cult. You call it a cult in your book, or at least cult-like. And I do call it a cult because I think the operative word that we keep using here is belief. These people have a belief. This Barbara Farmer, who, again, that's a pseudonym for someone who really needs FBI investigation. These are people who genuinely believe they are saviors. They are saving the trans kids. It's right there in that phrase that came with this phenomenon: save the trans kids. They think that they are doing something great in the world. They're saving the kids. You talk to a number of experts in this book and also therapists who have experience in this area, like Stephanie Wynn. You mentioned Beth Bourne earlier. There are a lot of people that are in this space that have had these experiences that are in the book that I've met, talked to, interviewed. So for our audience who was not at GenSpect, just can you talk about this connection of getting to meet these people and, tell their stories and sort of hang out in these spaces with them and be among the like-minded? And that's a very different thing. It's like a great relief. You're in a room full of people who already know what you know, and they don't have to be convinced, right? And that was a nice change of pace the first time I experienced it. That's why I keep going back to GenSpec. So, what did you think in terms of the conference? And what did you think about the difference between the world inside the conference and the world outside?
Matt, I honestly wasn't really thinking about the inside and outside so much as I was meeting these people who I have kind of fallen in love with because many of these people, the people that I have interviewed and gotten to know, they are warrior moms. Either they have already saved their children or they didn't succeed, but their children are a little safer now. Or some of them have lost their children and they don't know what's happening, but they are fighting for other children. They're fighting for other families. They're fighting for other moms and dads. They they have taken this horrible experience and they have turned it into a mission to make sure that to the extent possible it's not going to happen to another mom or dad or child. I love these people and to meet them in person was just such a moving experience. For me, that was the big thing. I didn't really even think of, yes, the outside world is not like this, because of course the outside world is not like this. And cult like, yes, well, yes, it is a cult. Half of Western civilization right now belongs to a cult and doesn't know it. That's insane, isn't it? But it's true.
As an historian, I can say that I'm not surprised by it. And I have, for the last 3 years at the distance, approached the topic as faith formation, that's what I see going on. That to a certain degree, what's been happening is that the old faiths faded, they became passe, they were no longer helpful to people who were on one side of the political aisle. And so this new belief comes along, and it's ersatz. That's a word from the German, and it's a good word because it means the substitution of a thing that is not as good as the original,
Mhm.
is what that word infers. So you get this sort of substitute belief, save the trans kids. And it animates these, people, these teachers in these blue schools, and even increasingly in red schools. They think they're saving the children. And of course, what you find out as you learn about what's going on the other side of the recruitment process is it's very dark. It's, a medicalized self-harm cult. And it's difficult to get attention to that in the first place. It's so toxic, people don't want to touch it. That's what I was told when I first started speaking out on this issue, is that nobody would want to touch it
Mhm.
because it was too toxic. And you sort of had that reaction from Reader's Digest, it sounded like, which is amazing because Reader's Digest is a hallowed conservative institution. I want to use a small c with conservative there. I don't mean to say that the politics are strictly on the right. I'm saying that it is a very careful institution. So that's interesting that you ran into that. And Lisa Sellen Davis has run into the same sort of thing. She submitted, op-eds or stories to various outlets, New York Times, et cetera, that wouldn't run them because that bubble of information, it had to be closed. And so you encountered the bubble, and you've had the wonderful experience of meeting people who've burst out of that bubble like we have. But have you lost anything? Have you had consequences as a result of your writing this book, of your speaking out?
Oh, of course. Yes, I had to make the decision that because my friend group here in the Portland area is 100% behind all of this, because I'm unfortunately going to have to say, former friends, because I don't think they'll speak to me any longer. I've tried. Um, will, continue to see me as evil. These are people who I used to spend Thanksgiving with at their home, who came here for Christmas Eve. They have a gay son who has now gotten all the hormones and surgeries. And yeah, so yes, I have lost pretty much my entire friend group in this area. But I And it was a consideration when I started working on this. I have to admit, I was reluctant to lose people I love. But at the same time, I felt that you cannot look away from this. You have to do something. It's like if you see someone lying in the street bleeding, do you keep walking? So you have to do something about this. So yes, I had certainly not the losses that some people have had, where they've been, cast out of their professions and um, uh, uh, pretty much financially ruined. But you mentioned something about how, yes, even someone like Reader's Digest wouldn't touch this. And it does seem to be something that, again, small c conservative. I love these people. So it never bothered me that their politics were different from mine. And I really did think that this was something that they'd want to look into because I've written some fairly wide-ranging pieces for them, everything from China's Belt and Road to, a plane coming down and, a child of 15 finding her way, surviving out of the woods by herself. Uh, they've always been very open, but they couldn't do this. And then the other day I was doing a reading from the book to a small group in Washington, and I was talking about things like the queer theory and Gail Rubens, who is, I consider, the godmother of queer theory, and Foucault and the rest. And another woman who was also speaking that night said, well, you're right, but if you say this to people who have never heard about it, they're going to think you're wearing your tinfoil hat because it's so outrageous that people simply will not believe it when you tell them. They won't believe that this is what the schools that people trust, are brainwashing children into. This is what the teachers themselves are being brainwashed into, though, what they have been brainwashed into. And, in any community, people, and certainly a school is a community, and if every teacher believes that this is the right thing to do, then they support this. So yeah, it's the outrageousness of it that actually adds a, a, a layer of protection to this cult, because no one is going to believe this is actually happening unless they have the evidence in front of them. And I do hope that people who are already aware are going to look at this and say, perfect Christmas present for my friend who might be ready to hear this, who maybe still believes that there are these magical beings who are called trans children, still believes that there are these magical beings called trans women who all of a sudden one day at the age of 50 decided, well, I'm not a man, I'm a woman now. Uh, but I think there's an opening from the sports arena of all places, because everybody can see sports, right? They say, yeah, I believe that, yeah, what I'm hearing from CNN and MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post about the horrible right-wing people who are trying to deny these kids care. But should a boy really be playing against girls when he's so much stronger? Should a boy really be undressing in front of little girls? Should little girls be forced to undress in front of a boy who suddenly decides, hey, I'm one of you now? So I think this is giving us a little opening to say, okay, if you can see the problem with boys competing against girls in sports, if you can see the problem of schools saying, hey girls, here's this, he was Andrew last week, now he's Andrea, and he's going to be dressing with you and undressing with you. If you can see that problem, maybe you're ready to see the whole problem. And so I'm kind of hoping that as this book comes out, and it's pretty close to Christmas time, that this will be in a few Christmas stockings of people who might be ready to find out the whole truth.
Anita, you wrote a great book, so what is next for you? Do you have another project on the horizon?
I really don't. To me, this is more than a book. This is, I've never actually thought of myself as going from writing about something to becoming an activist for this, but I'm at an age where I want to make a difference with my life. I want to not to have just taken up space on this planet. I want to reach people. I want to be part of the solution. And so I'm going to be donating my services to a couple of groups to do some writing for them. I've been testifying remotely uh, for legislation in various states that is designed to help people who have been harmed by this ideology, and also to testify against uh, some horrible bills that come up that extend this ideology. Eventually, I will, find something else that animates my imagination and my passion, because a book is a big thing. It's not like an article. As I say, usually an article would take me, because Reader's Digest was wonderful about giving me time to research. I could research for 3 months before I finally sat down to write. So a book is a big commission and commitment, and requires great passion. And right now, even though the book is done, this is still my great passion.
And where can listeners find your work?
Well, my I have a website, of course. Previous work, anitabartholomew.com. I've got a Substack that really isn't getting very much attention lately, because I've been trying to get the word out about the book itself, Sacrificial Lambs, it's already available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and, independent booksellers. So pretty much anywhere where you might want to find a book to read, you will find Sacrificial Lambs. Um, I also want to say one more thing that I think it's important to talk about, and that is that I think we have to stop worrying about people seeing us wearing tinfoil hats. I think we have to have conversations that are difficult, and we have to find a way to talk to our friends and relatives and neighbors and tell them what we know, and lead them by the hand to understand, or at least be open to, this true horror story that we are living through.
Anita, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, Matt, thank you so much for having me. And I hope I didn't ramble on too long. I can do that.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Well, it was wonderful meeting with you today. And I really appreciate your taking the time to talk to me, and to talk about the book.
Thank you for listening to the full podcast. The Distance is an encampment for everyone made politically homeless by gender ideology. Visit our website at www.thedistancemag.com to support our work with a monthly or annual premium subscription.